that gives us a little bit of, of a push that we feel we need to do something, but we're not so sure. And our attitudes, what we want to do, and then the stuff from the outside can be in conflict with one another. And then we have all kind of ways to either kind of pull away from it or approach it.
Welcome to the Ideal Investor Show. Today we have a special guest, a fellow German guest. So no fear for anybody. We're not going to do this in German, even though we could with Sibylle here on our show today as a guest. So thank you first, Sibylle, for coming on the show and giving us some of your valuable time. So first thing, like we always do, say hello and maybe tell us a little bit who you are, what you do, where you're hanging out, what's on your mind.
That's so nice. Thank you so much. I would be all confused with my languages if we switch from German to English. So my name is Sibylle Georgiana, and I'm excited to call in today. I think we have a lot of joint passions. We met at a organizational psychology conference, which is also my background. I'm a clinical and organizational psychologist with a private practice here in Southern California. And one of my areas, and that comes all the way from my original career in investment banking, is that I do help people with all various maybe struggles or questions that range from a concern all the way to an addiction. And even financial behaviors can be so stressful. And so I do love this whole topic of looking at us in this very holistic way, which includes financial wellness, financial health.
That's cool.
Yeah. So I really love, this area here. And I do have a couple of online courses for people who just want to build their capacities to make the best guided decisions. I do have a podcast on mental wellness and using your voice and sanity and all that good stuff. So I love anything that helps a person to be holistically well and well-grounded.
Yeah, that's awesome. So how does high-powered investment banking lady get into organizational psychology?
So that was fun too. I worked in portfolio management, and that portfolio manager said, you need to do, I think he had some type of trading. He saw me and I just looked at it and I was like, well, this is so stressful, but I loved working with the people in the bank. And I was like, I should just do something really to help people to be holistically well at work, to be at their best. And that field of organizational psychology, which then also led me to be looking more, at stuff that's not so healthy. So that would be clinical psychology. That's how I got into that field. It was more through my own work and really wanting to see anybody, even in that fast-paced investment banking world. I wanted them to be as healthy as possible because I was shocked originally how much stress there was in that field or in that type of work.
Yeah, absolutely. That's cool. And can you give us maybe a little bit of a description? I mean, I know there's always, patient or client confidentiality, but a little bit more like bigger picture. What kind of people and what kind of issues would people come to you and get your help?
That's a very good question. So a lot of times, as we all know, it's kind of hard to pinpoint like an area of need. So sometimes people come and they're just so overwhelmed with everything, and then they feel anxiety, but they don't really know why. Or, it just feels like the world's coming all to like a certain place. Or sometimes people use the beginning of the year as a place to mark and to put the foot on the brake and really deal with maybe a few sense of like anxiety and just wanting that a little bit attended to. But then I also help clients who are coming with a specific goal. So that could be as specific as wanting to be less in chronic pain. So, a lot of times we have difficulties with sleep, with food, with digestion. I mean, there could be all kind of ways how the body manifests stress. And they come in and they really want more downshifting of that. And I get referrals from physical therapist offices, for example, that, where they kind of hit a point and then it feels as if they can't progress in their physical therapy unless they would downshift a little of that anxiety. So that's one side of my work. And then the other one is topics around betrayal, topics around affair recovery, helping people to be very clear as to how they want to be in their relationships and repair relationships affected by problematic behaviors. So anything even to the point of addictive behaviors, and even a process such as shopping and food and sexuality and, that can also, gambling, trading that can all be potentially addictive. So some people come in there really clear that they need to make some changes. And that's also what we do together then.
Yeah, that's very cool. So I wonder, since the qualification also says organizational psychology, do you have mainly people that find you some way privately, or do they come from companies, or both? Or how would somebody have to imagine that to work?
Well, I think both ways. I recently had a company reach out, which I thought was interesting. I was like, what's the criteria for you to look me up? And they said, we looked at you, you had your phone number on your website, the direct phone number, for example. Sometimes it's that type of connection, but then I do have a lot of people who come as a referral from either somebody who I work with or practice I worked with, other practitioners I worked with.
Yeah, and I want our audience to understand real quick. I mean, anybody who's been following the Ideal Investor Show or our operations at Ideal Wealth Grower for a little bit, they know that before we even started all this mentoring and support in real estate investing and passive income portfolio development, I did a lot of organizational coaching and mentoring in the business world. And one thing that I've always kind of pounded on, preach, whatever you want to call it, is that when you are in this mentoring, coaching, maybe combined relationship, that at least I love that you always say holistic, because I think the same way, like theory, you kind of approach. For those of you who want to actually ever read a really thick book, go to Theory EU. Another fellow German from Hanover who wrote that. Anyway, but what I was getting at is in the engagement for mentoring and coaching, I have seen it several times, especially when it was in business environments, where the first inclination is to say, okay, this person is struggling with either advancing or handling the relationship within the department or anything like that. And when you then get into the actual engagement to find out, well, there are certain things that are not just process oriented, there are behavioral things where the opportunity to change for the better is inhibited by something that is somehow traumatic or whatever in the past. And I have always said, not just for myself, but for anybody who asked me, or went through trainings, because I think we would both agree, the learning about the area of business or the area of engagement never really ends. There's always new stuff to learn. So in those opportunities, I've always said, when you detect that there is something that goes way beyond your qualification of, unpacking some traumatic event in the past, whether it's during parenting or from an accident or from something that happened during school years or so, then you want to find a certified and qualified person like you, Sibylle, as a psychologist or psychiatrist or whatever exactly needs to be, and basically give that coaching/mentoring client to this expert to very deliberately, carefully, consciously unpack the situation, hopefully find a way to resolve it, and then come back and be really ready for that behavioral change that ultimately, hopefully in this overall holistic picture, leads to kind of like the desired outcome that was originally identified. Although I admit, like you said, sometimes what was originally said the issue is and what it should become and what really happens over time can be very different. But at least, when I think it's important for anybody listening or asking themselves, should coaching or any kind of help in this way from an outside person be considered when you feel, you have fears or anxieties or stuff like that, then for anybody to always realize, when it gets to what in your title it says clinical, right? I would say when it gets to the point where you detect there's something clinical or traumatic, then don't try to fix it. Give it to the people like you, Sibylle, who actually have learned and got training on how to do this. This has always been really important for me to make that distinction, right? Like anybody can pretty much nowadays say I'm a coach. Not that I'm advising or advocating that, but I know it's possible. But then you still need to keep in mind you're dealing with people and people's psyche, and it's fragile. So switching gears a little bit, going back to your powerful investment banker background, what I'm detecting, and I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, is we had conversations before and we touched on our free manual on the website. And I know you're working a lot in the area of how can we help people with their mindset about their opportunities, their paths forward, what they can do to reach their goals and stuff like that. And so what I've seen, especially in the transition from 2021 now to 2022, that a lot of the media, a lot of the information, the so-called gurus, everybody is saying, oh, the Fed is going to increase rates 4 times this year. Inflation is through the roof and we could maybe have hyperinflation. Real estate prices, which is our area, have risen so much it's potentially too late to do anything. I missed the boat again and stuff, So everything where you would say, okay, if I take the words out and just look at the behavior, this looks and sounds unstable, fearful, insecure, not really the kind of personality where you'd say, I take the reins and I'm going to reach my goal. I go to Axel and ask him about the investor journey, and then he is going to hold my hand and we're going to get on our horses and ride to the time freedom point. It's more, like, how do I even get you to look, there is a horse. The question out of that is, for one, have you detected that there is this kind of environment evolving right now? And with your background, what would you recommend, or what are you doing, and what would you help our audience to maybe see they can do to get out of, kind of, for lack of a better term, out of the funk and more into like a positive, creative mindset?
Mm-hmm. So those are really good questions. So I think, and that's, again, me looking at it from a very technical point of view, just even from a process, right? How the brain is affected by information we get. And the environment gives us always a ton of information, and some of it is very targeted. Media, maybe how language is used, how certain numbers are being presented. And so I do think that slowing it a little bit down and saying, taking a step back, and then even giving ourselves the capacity to somehow find a way to disengage from that tension, right? From the messages given, that gives us a little bit of, of a push that we feel we need to do something, but we're not so sure. And our attitudes, what we want to do, and then the stuff from the outside can be in conflict with one another. And then we have all kind of ways to either kind of pull away from it or approach it. And so for me personally, I think even looking at the worksheet on your webpage, it gives you a little bit like a way to step back and say, okay, what is it, right? So even if we slowed it down just to the point, I sometimes tell my clients, just if you notice anything this week, just put it in your phone, bring it as a talking point, put a keyword. And so what it does is it pulls us a little bit out of that potential tension between what we would want if we weren't so stressed, or, if we wouldn't be so bombarded with certain pieces of information where that could really like put us onto one way, when in reality, like better decision making is usually more fruitful if we have the capacity to somehow look at more than one influence. And I do believe that I'm a big fan of accountability, guidance. I call it babysitting for myself. I need somebody who kind of babysits me on these very uncomfortable topics, right, which I naturally would not gravitate towards, or where I'm like, oh my goodness, I get all of this. And then I see people doing this over here. And then I'm like, oh my goodness, am I missing out? So all of that, I think slowing it down, and any handout, taking a note, talking with you, I think just having a one-on-one with a real person who just to brainstorm a couple of points, maybe get a second opinion if we're not 100% sure, and if that kind of confirm the notions, that it would make us maybe a little bit more confident. So I think that's what I would like, maybe to that second question, recommend to get out of this place of feeling stuck or frozen or in a fight or flight, where we feel we got to work or move real fast because otherwise we're missing out on something, which we may not, however, feel comfortable with naturally. So I think getting really clear on our values and getting clear as to, to understand what we could pursue, those might be 2 starting points to get us a little bit, better situated, just that we know we're at a good place.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, and I think that is great advice. One thing that I suggested, and I've done this pretty much every year when a new year starts, not just because there's tradition of New Year's resolutions, but overall, I really think it's important to have goal setting, and I wish we would do it more than just around the new year. But fundamentally, one of the things that I think is important is to say, okay, why have people struggled so often in large percentages not to accomplish what they actually commit to themselves to do and set a goal? And what I'm finding is that the goal is oftentimes either not specific enough, meaning like it's too broad, Or the other thing, and I differentiate a goal and a BHAG. I don't know if you've heard that before, as like big, hairy, audacious goal and a regular goal. So BHAG. But the point is, if it's a BHAG, that requires almost mandatory to have sub goals that are smaller. But even those sub goals, I believe, should be broken down. And I always remember from my studies what John Cotter wrote in Leading Change is identify smaller sub goals, or what he called wins. And then every time you actually accomplish one of those smaller sub goals or steps, or whatever word you want to use, have a celebration, if for nothing else than to reconfirm to yourself, I could do it, or I have done it, right? And the more often, let's say each sub goal can be done in 2 to 4 weeks, well, by the time we have Independence Day, you have celebrated anywhere between 7 and 15 times little things. And it depends from person to person. I hope you would agree. Some people need 3 celebrations to believe it. Others need 5 celebrations. Maybe you need 10 celebrations. But halfway through the year, you would, number one, still see I'm still doing it. I'm still going in the right direction. And I'm craving for the next celebration, which I always find is a motivator to do more and go in the same direction. Now, that sounds, I think, reasonable from a concept perspective, but you as an expert, I'm kind of curious, are there any things that you would suggest with that in mind when people come to the conclusion, whether it's externally or by their own devices, to say, but the future is so uncertain, I don't even really know if it makes sense to start or to get going or to take action?
Well, and I think that's so easy, right? We have now the world at our fingertips, all the information that we have, right? And we don't live on our plot of land and have no way of knowing what's going on in the world where we could just focus on the one thing. I always, venture out to say, we just pick one thing that comes to mind. It could be just one that's floating by right now that may not even be super related. Let's just pick that, and just take one thing as a way to kind of flex your muscles and to explore that and see how you can make that a manageable, like performable in a way that is something you can really manage. And it's in a way amazing how a thing that just, comes to mind as we brainstorm can be something that can give maybe the oil into the engine to, keep going and saying, well, I've had this thing there for a long time. I wanted to finish this project for 2 years. And well, what would be missing? And just do maybe something that there was already a lot of good.
Yeah, I think
right? Could be just anything, basically.
Yeah, you just threw the ball. I want to challenge a little bit and tell me if I'm overdoing it, but it sounds to me there's a little story in there. Is there any story where you can say, without naming names or stuff like that, what such a one thing could be and how it worked out? Anything that you know from your practice where that actually worked and you can share?
Well, in a way, I can share that because, so let's say one of the techniques that I use is from a trauma and stress reduction type of therapy, which is called EMDR therapy. So eye movement, desensitization, and reprocessing. And it literally allows the mind to process the stress response in a very striking way. And as the mind is very organized, even the question of, is there something just coming by that's a little random, brings us to a topic usually that is of concern, that has been of value. So it's not even that we have to come up with an outside list of things to do. And so for clients with this type of work, or even with this type of tool, I had a client who came in just for chronic pain and tumultuous stuff in her background. And she ended up going into, I want to say, a PhD program here in a Southern California school. And this is a bigger goal, right? So one step led to the other, to the other, to the other, where it was just, she had just one course missing. And then we just looked at it, well, she took a summer class, it would be just 8 weeks. And she could just do it all summer long. And she had really nothing going on. And then it came from this to the next, to the next. And, suddenly there was a bigger career goal. And then there was funding for that career change. And it's beautiful, that these seemingly small things that we maybe set aside and say, that's ridiculous. I have so much going on. I don't even want to look at this thing that, I started out years ago, and I'm a little embarrassed how long it took me, that, it could be still a catalyst to move forward. Other examples are For example, I help people with transition into retirement. We always think retirement is awesome, which it is. However, sometimes the residual stress keeps kind of ruminating or keeps people. And so even just tracing it back to those moments that were where, again, the mind just is so able to run with it. And through these seemingly small activities like writing down, like what comes to mind, a goal as you would identify it, writing down what was maybe an unfinished piece on the bucket list. So a small thing that seems to be maybe not doing much can be at the same time a great tool to move people in ways we can't even imagine sometimes when we just put that down.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And actually, it reminds me a few years ago, and I adopted something that has helped me, and maybe it helps our audience as well, is to look for what could be a phrase or a term for the year, right? And so a few years ago, I think 3 or 4 years ago, and then I typically either put it on our website, or I put it in a podcast, or I put it in an article, or at the time, I don't know, I was obviously infatuated by LinkedIn, so I put it into my LinkedIn thing. And at the time, it was, I want to be a catalyst. And I really meant that almost like in the chemical sense, right? Like the small thing where you have two other things, something that is in a certain state and something else is in another state, but to really make it into something special, it takes that little catalyst, right? And I was reminded when you said it can be a little thing and one step at a time, right? The catalyst can be a little thing, and it's sometimes amazing what kind of reactions and results it can actually cause when the two ingredients find the catalyst to come together and actually really create something that was maybe unexpected or much bigger than you find out. I mean, I'm sure people, my friends, will say, oh, you're talking about the Pepsi bottle and the Mentos Chewy or something like that. That would be, if you're the Mentos. But fundamentally, it reminded me when you said those small steps, how can we find some catalyst that can allow us to actually move forward or take action? So I really want to thank you for triggering that, because I think if we can adopt a mindset where we're believing we are either the catalyst or we can find the catalyst, that can help. And then maybe somebody, like I think you suggested, to help us along the path so that we can ultimately reach the goal. And I think it's really important to consider, okay, how would it actually look like? I actually offer people the idea to say, sit down, try to find a quiet place. And if it takes longer than one time, then do it more than one time. And basically write a letter to yourself in which you describe day by day, hour by hour, how 2 weeks look like from morning to night for 2 weeks, as if you were to write a diary for someone else, but 3 to 5 years in the future, right? And it's not so much so that in 3 to 5 years you can look at how realistic or unrealistic it is, but it challenges you to actually start imagining how could it look like if the things that I would like to have were to actually happen. And it also crystallizes to describe in that diary in some way, well, how did I end up being here? You can't just start writing, I get up and then I do this and this, when there is no context, right? So you're almost forced to put a little context in. So those are just a few little tools that I think are very helpful. One little story that I want to get across for our audience, since it's the early part of the year, and maybe for you as well, is oftentimes people come to me and say, well, this real estate investing is all good and prices have gone up so much. I think this is way too much money for me, and I'm not really sure what's going to happen in the future. And my response is, you can start with $50. I want our audience and anybody listening to understand, to practice the steps, like you triggered this in me to bring this up, is to practice the small steps, and being the catalyst, you can literally start with $50. Now you need somebody, like in your case for the psychology part, in my case for the investing, mentoring and support, who helps you, but it literally can start with $50. And I think there's barely anybody who couldn't say, well, if I'm really interested, I have $50. And I'm not saying this is to me, it's for you to use as your first investment. So that's a little bit about the stuff and the stories and the catalyst and so forth. So when we come to the end of our podcast, I always try to ask 2 questions, sometimes 3 if we have the time. I guess today we have 1.5 or 2 maybe. And the first one would be, Sibylle, if you had free choice, time machine available and everything, who, if you could, would you want to meet and why?
I mean, that's a very good question. I would probably, there was a lot of like ancient writing about, in our case, we talk about money, right? But I also think investing, it has to do with me, how I use my time, my energy. I think for me, investing is like a broader many types of assets there. So, one of the things, if we think about, ancient times, there's these people, and I know, for example, I think Solomon was one of those people, the richest or the wisest man under the sun for like a while. I would like to just sit there and quiz that person, see how did he come up with all of that, right? I mean, how do people who are looked at as wise or influential, how did they get there? So I would probably, and then I was thinking, again, this is just maybe not like a time that was with like a lot of convenience or something. So I would want to make sure I can come back and use my dishwasher and stuff.
Yeah, that's the second question. The traveling is secure. Don't worry.
I don't have to worry about it. Yes. So really like help, like finding people and want to learn from people who, they've seen a lot and they've been at different places, maybe moved their priorities around. Those people I would want to visit and that fared well or did well.
Okay, that's cool. And then the second question, kind of related, is if you had a time machine more to go to an era or to a time, forward or backward, where would you go and why?
An era. So that is a good question. I don't know if I would want to necessarily go into the future. I think the period of time when, people went to the moon, learning about the Cold War. So I feel that was a very influential, I know it influenced me growing up a lot. And even if I had the capacity to be just a little older at the time to, look at it through different lens, maybe travel differently in that earlier, and maybe even all the way to the maybe 50s of the last century, right? When this whole things kind of evolved. And anyway, so I feel that just for the idea of understanding how, maybe certain movements that we're dealing with, how they came about, what we could learn from history, not just from my history book, that I studied that part in high school. But again, this is a whole different thing if you could go in person as an adult.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of cool. And I can tell you, I mean, when we do these interviews, I would say right now, probably about a 50-50 split between people who want to go somewhere in the future and people who go to any place in the past. For myself, I keep asking myself the question while I'm asking our guests like you, Sibylle, is what would I answer if I had to answer that question? It's kind of interesting how that shifts over time, right? Lately, for myself, I'm curious to see, is there a way or a time in the past where it would be possible to detect that what guided our behavior in a frame of norms is starting to kind of get brittle and disappear, right? Because when I observe through my lifetime what my parents and grandparents, for example, said why they do certain things and how often that was related to certain norms, almost to the point to say, well, that's just the way it's done. Right. And if you question one level further to say, well, why is it the way it's done? And then there's this whole history of how these norms came together. And I look now in the last, I don't know, few years, I've caught myself so many times to say, I would have never thought that's possible. And I don't mean technology, but, this whole spiel around fake news or what's a white lie, or can lying for certain people even ever be accepted, or how parenting works, or this whole deal about there's no more gold, silver, bronze, everybody has to get a trophy. When did that happen? Right? How is that what we now define as equality versus what it was 50 or 100 years ago? So I'm not so much asking, is it this way or that way, is it right or wrong? It's more like, where was the point where that norm started to kind of get brittle and fall apart, or at least people thought, well, I can take the leap and just do it differently and obviously get away with it otherwise. So
well,
that's more and more I catch people that get away with stuff where I thought that would never happen, it would never be possible. All right, cool. So before we close, thank you again, Sibylle, for being here. 2 quick things. One last word or kernel of wisdom that you can give to our audience, what they should do to have a great 2022. And then also maybe you can tell everybody who's listening or watching how can they get a hold of you if they want your help?
Yes, so I think to not be so stressed,
Right.
Post prep, I think just looking at a day, kind of like a day at a time. What's the best thing for this day? How can I make use of my time? And then out of that practice, I'm 100% sure there's something good evolving. As we just look a day at a time, what's a good use of my, the information that I consume, the information I hand out. How can I make this the best world we're in? So maybe I feel making it like a daily, like a little more of a practice makes it less scary to come up with something that feels maybe too big to accomplish. Or, we all have goals like floss more or, things that are a little bit hard to do. And, I think just making it a smaller endeavor to then say, I just pursue that for today.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And that's really great. I actually encourage our mentoring and coaching clients often to start a gratitude journal. Just one.
Oh, yeah, that's perfect.
And write what you just said, Sibylle, in the gratitude journal. And if after a month or even several months, you will see there's always something positive every day in your little journal, right? And it gives you positive energy. All right, cool. That's really wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. So how about I want to get some help from Sibylle. What do I need to do?
So I do have two websites. One is called toolsforvitality.com, and that's more around like purposeful living. And then the other one, when it has more to do with holistic sexuality and stuff like that, that's sexualhealthoc.com. And my phone number is on both of those websites, or you could email me at toolsforvitality. And then it's a German email address at gmx.de. But I'm sure if people get stuck, you can always forward my contact as well. Actually.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if anybody wants to get to Sibylle through me, then you can always contact me. And by the way, the OC stands for Orange County, I assume. So
yes,
Sibylle is not really in Germany. She is in Orange County. So it's for anybody who thought, oh, wow, maybe too far away. No, it's not that far away. It's actually right around the corner, at least.
Right around the corner, yes. I just like the German security on the email communication for my clients, right? That it's on a German server. It's not being, it feels, I have a Swiss email address too, so just in case people want to be extra safe. But I feel, I love being able to pick and choose a little bit of the, the security capacity in the global economy,
I was just about to say Sibylle is probably a global citizen, right? So,
I guess so, especially with that email address. Help myself. I'm like, that was my first email address with that email provider, and it's a good one to reestablish.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I thank you. And we will put all those links and names and websites and email addresses in the show notes for anybody who is curious or wants to reach out. And as you guys all heard, Sibylle said it, if you go to her website, she even has her phone number on it. So you can leave a message and I'm sure she's going to get back to you. So Sibylle, thank you so much again for making the time. Awesome conversation. And I hope we can do it again.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Ideal Investor Show. More info and the links we mentioned during the show are in the show notes, or you can go to our website at idealwealthgrower.com and sign up for the Apple Podcast link. And if you like to talk to me, sign up for a strategy call. Hopefully you want to share what you learned with your network and bring more people in. We are really eager to hear your comments. And until next time, be well, stay safe, and ciao.